dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
On January 14th, 1963, these words made Alabama Governor George Wallace the symbol of Southern resistance. That spring, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference targeted the largest city in his state for a major confrontation.
Coming out of Albany, which was what many people consider not a victory, they needed a victory. Dr. King's image at this time was slightly on the wane because he had not projected. I say, I assure you, if you come to Birmingham, this movement can not only gain prestige, but really shake the country.
Birmingham, Alabama was known for its strict segregation and racial hatred, a city that some called Birmingham because of many bomb attacks against blacks. City officials were staunch segregationists. The most ardent foe of the civil rights movement was the Commissioner of Public Safety, Theophilus Eugene Connor, Bull Connor, whose opinions earned him election to 6 terms.
The so-called Negro movement is a part of the attempted takeover of our country by the lazy, the indolent, the beatniks, the ignorant, and by some misguided religionists and bleeding hearts, and all being led by the politicians who stay in office by appealing, remember, not to reason, but to the most votes.
April 1963, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference planned to desegregate downtown stores and to show the nation the face of Southern racism. But only a few in Birmingham responded to SCLC's call for massive demonstrations.
And the black business community and some of the white clergy were pressuring us to call off the demonstrations and just get out of town. We didn't know what to do. And he sat there in room 30 in the Gaston Motel, and Martin didn't say anything. And then finally, he got up and he went in the bedroom, and he came back with his blue jeans on and his jacket, and he said, look, he said, I don't know what to do. He said, I just know that something has got to change in Birmingham. I don't know whether I can raise money to get people out of jail. I do know that I can go into jail with them. And not knowing how it was going to work out, he walked out of the room and led a demonstration and went to jail. That was, I think, the beginning of his true leadership.
At this time, local white clergy were criticizing King and the campaign.
The ministers published in the newspapers a diatribe against Martin, calling him a troublemaker and saying that he was there stirring up trouble to get publicity. And he sat down and took that newspaper, and he had no paper, and he was in solitary confinement. And he started writing an answer to that one-page ad around the margins of the New York Times.
For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied.
8 days later, King accepted release on bond to plan the next phase of the demonstrations. That plan would be the most controversial yet.
We wanted to get the black community in Birmingham involved, and the way you get people involved is get their children involved.
They were taking the kids out of school, marching, and I thought that was unnecessary. In fact, my idea was the kids, many of them didn't know what it was all about to start with.
I'm on my way.
On May 2nd, the children began to march in Birmingham. At first, the groups were small. policemen arrested them, loaded them in police wagons, and took them away to Birmingham jail. As more children joined the march, police called in school buses to haul the demonstrators to jail. By the end of the day, 700 children had been arrested.
Most adults have bills to pay, house notes, rents, car notes, utility bills, but the young people, wherein they can think at the same level, are not at this point hooked with all those responsibilities. So a boy from high school, he get the same effect in terms of being in jail, in terms of putting pressure on the city as his father, and yet he's not, there's no economic threat on the family because the father's still on the job.
The next day, more than 1,000 children stayed out of school and gathered to march from the 16th Street Baptist Church. Bull Connor tried to stop the marches before they began and brought out the city's police dogs. Next, the fire department was brought in and Bull Connor ordered water hoses turned on the demonstrators. With 100 pounds of pressure per square inch, the water hit with enough force to knock the bark off trees. As water pounded the demonstrators, David Vann was on the phone with A.G. Gaston.
And then he said to me, he said, but Lawyer Vann, said, they've turned fire hoses on a little black girl. They're rolling that little girl right in the middle of the street. Now, I can't talk to you no more.
It was it, and stand up on my building looking down on Bull Connor and them shooting water in the park right across from my office there in that park. I guess that's the most outstanding thing in my mind right now. I just couldn't imagine what could happen.
The conflict gained national attention and news coverage of the event shocked the American public.
And it was a masterpiece of the use of media to explain a cause to the general public of a nation. Because in those days you had 15 minutes of national news and 15 minutes of local news. And in marching only one block, they could get enough news film to fill all of the newscasts of all of the television stations of the United States.
Photographs appeared in newspapers throughout the world, and the Birmingham story was told in many languages. The Russian newspaper Pravda ran a cartoon of police intimidating a black child. The federal government worried about America's image in other parts of the world. Governor Wallace saw it differently.
I will never be concerned about the attitude. In the first place, the average man in Africa and Asia doesn't even know where he is, much less where Alabama is.
On the 5th day of the children's campaign, the confrontation moved to the downtown area. Once again, Bull Connor summoned his firemen. With no place to run, no trees for protection, the demonstrators were hit with the full force of the water. By evening, 2,500 demonstrators had been arrested, over 2,000 of them children. All jails in the city and county were filled. The strategy worked. The city began to negotiate. 8 days after the children began marching, an agreement was reached with the business community. Merchants agreed to desegregate lunch counters and to hire black employees. The next night, the Ku Klux Klan met outside the city, and Grand Dragon Robert Shelton gave this warning.
No business people in Birmingham or any other city has the authority to attempt any type of negotiation when it deals in governmental affairs of a municipality. Martin Luther King, in my opinion, epitaph can be written here in Birmingham.
Several hours later, A bomb exploded outside Martin Luther King's room at the Gaston Motel. King had already left Birmingham and no one was in the room at the time. As a large crowd gathered, the Alabama State Police moved in and began beating blacks with clubs and rifles. In response, angry blacks rebelled and set fire to several buildings. Over the next few weeks, the riots that began in Birmingham spread to other cities. Racial tensions gripped the country and President Kennedy was moved to action.
The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south. Where legal remedies are not at hand, redress is sought in the streets. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it has not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
Kennedy proposed a new civil rights bill, and movement leaders wanted to make sure he followed through.
Freedom Now movement, hear me.
The civil rights movement had mobilized communities. Now it set out to mobilize a nation. In the summer of 1963, leaders announced plans for a mass march on Washington. Afraid it would become violent, Attorney General Robert Kennedy tried to prevent the march, without success. August 28, 1963. Leaders and supporters of civil rights organizations joined in Washington, D.C. to make a passionate plea for jobs and freedom. More than 200,000 people arrived from across the nation for the march from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. It was a triumphant day for A. Philip Randolph, who first proposed such a march in 1941. But as the marchers gathered at the Lincoln Memorial, there was trouble behind the scenes. The White House was upset about a speech that was to be given by John Lewis, national chairman for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
In the first part of the speech, I said something like, we cannot support the proposed bill being introduced or being presented by President Kennedy, for it was too little and too late.
And John's speech was the only speech at the March on Washington that criticized the Kennedy administration for lack of civil rights enforcement because the SNCC people were being brutalized in the South.
As the program began on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Lewis refused to change his speech. Finally, A. Philip Randolph made a personal appeal to the young men from SNCC.
He was 75, and here we were, one-third his age, and, he was asking us to do this for him. He said, I waited all my life for this opportunity. Please don't ruin it. And we felt that for him that we had to make some concessions.
So the three of us, John Lewis, Cortland Cox, and myself, we huddled and sat together, and the rewriting took place at the Lincoln Memorial, and and it was done out of a spirit of unity. We wanted the March on Washington to go forward.
If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. How long can we be patient? We want our freedom, and we want it now.
The speech that captured the nation's attention was the stirring oratory of Martin Luther King.
Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring in Whitney Capital. When we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and and every hamlet, from every state and every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
In the White House, President Kennedy now saw the march as positive support for his civil rights bill. "18 days later, Birmingham, Alabama. Just before a Sunday morning service, a bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church where hundreds of children had once gathered to march against police dogs and fire hoses. 15 people were injured. 4 children were killed. The murder of these children shook the nonviolent movement to its core. As the people buried their dead, they sang, "We shall overcome." But in anger and in rage, many wondered how.
We felt like our own children had been killed, and we knew that the activity of the civil rights movement had been involved in generating the kind of energy that brought out this kind of hostility. And we decided that we would do something about it, and we said that we had 2 options. The first one was we felt confident that if we tried, we could find out who had done it, and we could make sure they got killed. And we considered that as a real option. And the second option was that we felt that if blacks in Alabama had the right to vote, that they could protect black children. And we deliberately made a choice and chose the second option.